Hi guys, it is Mrs. Stoller and Gertie, and we are outside today reading. We left off on chapter 4, and Sam was in town when he wasn't supposed to be, visiting Betsy Reed, and the Continental soldiers had just come through Reading, kind of collecting all the weapons from people, and they'd roughed up Tim and Sam's dad a little bit, looking for the brown Bess. And Sam came back to the house, and once he saw that his dad was still alive and okay, he took off again. So chapter 5 and 6 today. Up to that time, the war hadn't been very real. I mean, I knew what was going on because of stories in the Connecticut Journal and from tales we heard in the tavern. Stories travelers would tell us about somebody being killed or suddenly coming across some fresh bodies in a field. One man who stopped us had been at the Battle of Lexington and had been wounded in the knee there. He walked with a limp, and he had the ball that wounded him on a string around his neck. And of course, Sam wasn't the only one from Reading who joined the militia. There were others, and every once in a while you'd hear about this one or that one having been in a battle and maybe having been killed or wounded. But none of them were people I really knew, and so the war always seemed to me like a story, something that had happened in a faraway place or a faraway time and didn't have anything to do with me. But after the search for weapons, I had a different feeling about it. It was real, and it could come home to me, too. Luckily, the troops hadn't really hurt anybody. A few men who'd put up a fuss like Father had got punched around a little, and Father had that cut which left a very thin scar you could hardly see. But even if nobody got hurt, the people in Reading were good and angry about losing so many of their guns. Guns were valuable. It wasn't so much a matter of hunting. There wasn't much game to go around anyway, although some farmers occasionally got a deer or a muskrat for the cooking pot. Mostly people wanted guns to go after the wolves that sometimes came down into the pastures after lambs, and for general protection. The worst part of it was that food was already beginning to get short. Army commissary officers, like the one Sam was working for, were buying up a lot of the livestock to feed the troops. Sometimes soldiers would just take a couple of cows out of someone's field without paying for them, too. Both sides did it, the Patriots and the Tories. They weren't supposed to. They were supposed to pay. But a lot of time at the end of a day's march, they'd find that there wasn't anything for them to eat, and they would just go out into a field, butcher a couple of cows, cut them up, and carry them off to their camp on their shoulders. It was a terrible thing to lose your milking cows because it meant no more milk or butter or cheese. There wasn't anything anybody could do about it, though. Oh, whenever it happened, people would get up a petition and complain, but it never did very much good because the soldiers were gone and the beef was already eaten. By January of 1776, food was getting to be a real problem for us, too. It wasn't so much that we were going hungry, but that meat and flour and rum and beer and everything else we needed to run the tavern and the store kept going up and up in price all the time. This forced us to raise our prices, and then the prices would go up again, and we'd have to raise them some more. But still, the worst part of the war was missing Sam. Of course, he'd been gone at college before, so I'd gotten used to the idea of having to do his share of the work and all that. But when he was at Yale, I didn't have to worry about him all the time. Worry that he'd been shot or gotten sick or die or anything else. Although, to tell the truth, I envied him too. I could picture him in my mind standing up on top of the stone wall by the woodlot, the brown Bess cradled under his arm, waving at us. He seemed so brave and grown up, and I wished that I could be brave and grown up like him too. I didn't like the idea of being shot at or wounded or killed very much, but it seemed to me it must feel very wonderful to be able to load up a gun in that casual way that he did. I knew that a younger brother thought that the older brother was wonderful no matter what. I remember being little and watching Sam milk old Prue and admiring him and thinking about how clever he was. And then it got to be my turn to learn how to milk old Prue, and I found out that there wasn't any glory to it at all. It was just hard work that made your hands ache. So I guess that being a soldier probably didn't have much glory to it either. It was just mostly a lot of hard work. But still, I envied Sam, and I wished I was old enough to do something glorious too. So time passed, and the war went on. Sometimes we'd read about the Patriot victories, and other times we read about Tory victories. It all seemed very confused. It was hard to tell who was really winning. Partly because sometimes both sides claimed to have won the same battle. Father said, "The rebels are damn fools. How can they expect to beat the whole British army? They can win these skirmishes in the woods, but as soon as the British catch them in a pinched battle, they'll be done for, and no good can come out of it but a lot of dead men." Sometimes the Patriot militia would come through Reading, and usually the officers would come into the tavern for a mug of beer, but they never bothered anybody. They just went away again. I'd stand at the door and watch them go, and I wondered, if I was a soldier, which army would I join? The British had the best uniforms and shiny new guns, but there was something exciting about the Patriots, being the underdogs and fighting off the mighty British army. So it slowly became spring, and one April morning in 1776, Mr. Heron came into the tavern with Tom Worrups. There was a soft rain falling and a fire burning in the fireplace. Father was rushing a chair seat, and I was helping him. It all seemed very warm and cozy. Father stopped his work. "Good morning, Mr. Heron," he said. Father was always polite to Mr. Heron. He'd been to Trinity College in Dublin, and he was a surveyor. He'd been elected to the General Assembly in Hartford, but he'd been pushed out of it by the Patriots for being a Tory. He was rich, too, although nobody knew exactly where he got his money from. He owned a black man, and he had other servants besides. "Good morning, Life," he said to Father. Then he noticed me. "Good morning, Tim." "Good morning, sir," I said. "Life, you've got a smart boy there." Hang on a second. Gertie. Gertie, come here. Come here. Hey, come back. Hey, Gertie, come here. All the way. Hey. Hey, Gertie. Okay, fine. Okay. "You've got a smart boy there, smart as Sam if he wanted to be. I hope he's continuing on with school." My father shrugged. "I'd like him to, but I can't spare him here every day." Mr. Heron might have wanted me to go on with my schooling, but I wasn't so sure of it myself. I figured I was as smart as Sam, but I didn't have as much interest in school as he had. I liked ciphering all right, but I didn't care much for spelling and studying the Bible and memorizing Psalms. "Oh, Sam's way smarter than I am, sir," I said, just to be modest. "I'd like to see him in school when I can," Father said, "but I need him here a good deal. I can't run the tavern without him. Still, it's a shame to waste talent. I could make a surveyor out of him if he applied himself. Perhaps I could take him on as an apprentice in a year or two, once he's learned to cipher." Being a surveyor was a good thing. You could make a lot of money. Father said that surveyors always knew about the good deals on land and could get rich speculating. So that part sounded pretty good too. But I wasn't so sure about all that studying. "I don't know if I'm smart enough," I said, mostly to be modest again. "Certainly you are, Tim." He sat down at the long table. "Tim, how about getting me a pint of beer? And one for Tom, too." Tom Worrups did spare work for Mr. Heron. Sometimes he ran messages for him, too. He didn't sit because he was only an Indian, but stood against the wall. I got mugs down from the shelf and filled them and served them around, including one for Father. He sat down at the table, too, and I went back to rushing the chair. "What do you hear from Sam?" Mr. Heron said. "Nothing," my father said. I knew he didn't want to talk to Sam, but he couldn't be rude to Mr. Heron. "He never writes?" "No." They weren't paying any attention to me. I took a quick look at Tom Worrups. He was standing there holding his mug of beer, his face completely blank. I couldn't figure out what side he was on. He lived on Mr. Reed's land, and Mr. Reed was a patriot. But he ran messages for Mr. Heron, and Mr. Heron was a Tory. "It's a shame about Sam," Mr. Heron said. My father shrugged, but didn't say anything. Mr. Heron must have known that Father didn't want to talk about Sam, but he said, "Perhaps there'd be a way of finding out where he is." "If he wants to see us, he knows where we live," Father said. Mr. Heron nodded. "Actually, I didn't come here to talk about Sam. I want to talk about Tim. I have a little job I thought Tim might do for me. I need a boy to walk down to Fairfield for me." I watched my father's face. His eyes got narrow and he stared straight ahead. "Why a boy, Mr. Heron? What's wrong with Tom?" Heron shrugged. "Pretty hard for a strange Indian to walk down there without getting stopped every 5 miles. No one's going to bother a boy." It was a scary idea, but exciting. It could be a real adventure. But of course I knew that I wasn't supposed to have any opinion in the matter, so I kept my mouth shut. "What's he going to be carrying?" Father said. "Oh, just some business letters," Mr. Heron said. "Nothing important." Father said nothing, but he stared down into his beer. Mr. Heron took a drink. Then he said, There's no danger, Life. No one's going to bother a boy. Business letters, Father said. Yes, business letters. I couldn't keep my mouth shut any longer. I can do it, Father. I can walk down there tomorrow morning and be back by supper time. Be quiet, Tim. I'd pay him $1. My father stared into his beer again and then slowly began to shake his head. No, Mr. Heron, he said. I've got one mixed up in this bloody war already. I'm not going to let another one go. Mr. Heron paused before he spoke. I said they were business letters, Life. Business letters. My father stared back at him. No, Mr. Heron. No. When Father said no, he meant no. It disappointed me. It would have been a good adventure walking down to Fairfield on my own. It was on the Long Island Sound. I'd only been there 2 or 3 times in my life when I'd gone down with Father and Sam to buy rum. Carrying letters down to Fairfield would give me something to boast about to Sam. But Father had said no. That was that, and Mr. Heron knew it. Mr. Heron finished up his beer and stood up. I had more faith in you than that, Life, he said. I thought I could count on you. We're all making sacrifices these days. My father was standing too. I've made a sacrifice, Mr. Heron. I've lost a son. You know I have no love for the rebel, but this is one war I'm not going to fight. Mr. Heron nodded, and he and Tom Worrup's left. I picked up the beer mugs to clean them. I wish you'd let me go, Father. Nothing would have happened to me. My father put his hand on my shoulders. Those weren't business letters, Tim. What? I said, surprised. I don't know what Heron's game is. He talks like a Tory all right, but it doesn't all quite make sense. Best thing is not to get involved with him. You can be sure any letters he's sending out aren't just about ordinary business. Now, let's forget he even came in here. He stared into my eyes, and I stared back. Yes, Father, I said. But I couldn't forget about it. Mr. Heron had wanted me to carry some sort of war messages or spy reports or something, and that night as I lay in bed in the loft, I thought about it. Oh, it would scare me all right, walking down to Fairfield with spy messages, but I wanted to do it because it would give me something to boast about to Sam. He'd been having all the adventures, and he was going to come home with terrific stories about being in the army and fighting and all that, and I wanted to have something to tell too. Why should he have all the glory? Why shouldn't I have some too? I wanted him to respect me and be proud of me and not think of me just as his little brother anymore. I couldn't score telling points like he did, but I could be just as brave and do daring things like him too. It made me angry with Father for not letting me go. It wasn't right. Not with what Sam was doing. Of course, Father hadn't let Sam go. Sam had run away. But still it made me angry, and thinking about it, I slammed the bed with my fist. If only I could find a way to sneak off for the day. I thought about it some more the next morning when I was milking Old Prue, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. By the time I got Old Prue milked and driven out to pasture and fed the chickens and collected the eggs and hung the milk down in the well to keep it cool, I was plain boiling. It wasn't fair, that was all. And when I got back to the house, I was angry enough to stand up to Father. He was sitting at the taproom table drinking tea. I faced him and stood up as straight as I could. Father, why can't I carry messages for Mr. Huron? You're on the Tory side, too. He glanced at me and then blew on his tea to cool it. Because I said so. That's no reason, I said. He stared at me. If you don't stop arguing with me, I'll thrash you, Timmy. I don't care, I said. If we're supposed to be loyalists, we should help. He slammed his fist down on the table and then jerked his thumb towards his chest. I'll manage the politics in this family, he said. Father, Timothy, goddammit, I'm going to. Then he stopped, and I knew why. He'd shouted at Sam, and Sam had run away. He was scared that if he shouted at me, I'd run away too. Timmy, please, he said as calmly as he could. It's dangerous. You think that because you're only a child, they won't hurt you, but they will. They've been killing children in this war. They don't care. They'll throw you in a prison ship and let you rot. You know what happens to people in a prison ship? They don't last very long. Cholera gets them, or consumption, or something else, and they die. Tim, it isn't worth it. I knew he was right, that it wasn't worth taking the chance, but I wanted to do it anyway. But there wasn't any use in arguing with Father. 2 weeks later, I figured out how to do it. I was out on the road in front of the tavern trying to clean the mud and dirt off the boards we laid down there in the spring when Jerry Sanford came up the road. Where are you going? I said. "The shad are running," he said. He held out a coil of fishing line with hooks and weights attached. Father said I could try my hand at it. "You're lucky. Look what I have to do." "Go ask your father if you can go." "He won't let me. There's too much to do around the tavern." "You should ask him." So I went inside to where he was holstering the taproom table. "Hey, Father, Jerry Sanford is going to shad. Can I go with him?" "You've got a lot to do around here." "If I caught a lot, we could salt him down." He thought about it. "Well, all right, go. It would be nice to have some fish chowder for a change." So we went back to Jerry's house and got another line and some hooks and walked down to the mill stream, which was really the Aspetuck River. There was a dam there for the mill, and below the dam, a couple yards, was a large pool. In the spring, the shad ran upriver to breed, but they couldn't get past the mill dam, and the pool was just swarming with them. We caught dozens. We had a terrific time. My father was very pleased. He really enjoyed fish chowder. But best of all, I now had my excuse to get away. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. My biggest problem was getting to see Mr. Heron. If Father saw me talking to him, he'd be suspicious. And if he found out it was me who started the conversation, he'd know right away what it was all about. But luckily, 2 days later, Mr. Heron came into the tavern to buy a small keg of rum. My father wasn't around, and Mother said, "Tim will bring it right over, Mr. Heron." So I slung the keg of rum over my shoulder and followed Mr. Heron up the road to his house, which was only a couple 100 yards away from the tavern. We ran around to the back, and I carried the keg into the kitchen and set it up on the rack. He reached into his pocket and handed me a penny. "Thank you, sir," I said. "Have you thought any more about studying surveying with me someday?" "Well, I haven't exactly, sir, but I was thinking about that job you mentioned before." "Ah, your father changed his mind, did he?" Yes, sir. He said it would be all right so as long as he didn't know anything about it. If I just went and didn't tell him anything, he said he wouldn't object." Mr. Heron put his hand on my arm and gave me a little squeeze. "That's a lie, isn't it, Timmy?" I got all hot and blushed. "Well, I guess so, sir." He let go of my arm. "Your father doesn't change his mind very often, nor very easily." I felt very stupid, and I looked down at the ground. "Yes, sir." "I'd still like to go, though. Aren't we supposed to be loyal to the king?" He stroked his chin. "Not everybody thinks so. I do, though, sir. I didn't really have an opinion either way, but I thought it would help if he believed I was a strong loyalist." He smiled, a kind of funny smile. "You've got your brother's spirit, don't you?" Being compared with Sam made me feel good. "I'm as brave as he is," I said. "I believe it," he said. "Suppose I did let you run down to Fairfield for me. What would you tell your father?" "I'd tell him I was shad fishing. And come home with no fish. I'd tell him they weren't running or something. You can't always expect to catch something." He rubbed his forehead, thinking. "All right. If you come up early tomorrow morning, I'll have something for you to do to earn a shilling or two." So that night I asked Father if I could go fishing again, and he said yes. I felt sort of bad about it. It was lying, and lying was a sin, and so was going against your father. And even if it hadn't been a sin, I would have felt badly about it, because Father trusted me, and I was being dishonorable. But I wanted some glory too. So on Wednesday morning, I got up way before the sun, when it was just beginning to get light, and took my fishing line and hooks, and make my excuses hold up, and I walked down to Mr. Heron's house. I was lucky. It was a good day. That time of year, it could have easily been pouring rain and very cold. "Gertie, come here. Sorry. Come here, all the way. Come here, all the way. Keep coming. Keep coming. Okay, lay down. Lay down. All the way." It could have easily been pouring rain and cold. But the sun came up, and there was only streaks of clouds in the sky. The birds were singing, and the wildflowers along the roadside were bright and gay. I felt excited in a good way, and as I walked along to Mr. Heron's, I began to whistle Yankee Doodle before I remembered I ought to keep quiet so people wouldn't notice where I was going. When I got to Mr. Heron's house, I went around to the kitchen door and started to knock, but I hardly got my fist up when the door jerked open, and Mr. Heron grabbed me by the arm and pulled me in. We walked down a hall and into his study. It seemed awfully rich to me. There was a little stove there with a few coals and a desk piled full of papers and a carpet on the floor and a chest of drawers. He sat down at the desk and wrote something out on a piece of paper and sealed it up. Timmy, you'll have to move quickly. This message has to go to Fairfield. It will take you at least 5 hours to walk down there and 5 to walk back, and you'll have to be home before dark in order to not raise suspicions. Have you ever been to Fairfield? A couple of times, with Father and Sam to get rum. Then you know where the dock is. Now listen carefully. Just before you get to the dock, there's a road to the left. Down the road about a mile, there's a house with white siding and green trim. Knock there. Ask for Mr. Burr, and give him this letter. He'll give you $1. Right? Now repeat it back. I did so, and then tucked the letter down inside my shirt, and I left, slipping out the back way and through his pasture before I cut onto the road. The sun was now up and rising over the meadowland into the east. I judged it to be about 7 o'clock. The sun wouldn't go down again until about 7 that night, which gave me 12 hours, plenty of time if I walked along swiftly. In fact, if everything went well, I could easily be back by the middle of the afternoon, which might even give me time to catch a few shad to show Father. I hid the fishing tackle behind a stone wall, just in case. I moved at a brisk pace. Despite the sun, the air in the morning was cool and fresh. It was nice weather for walking, and I felt excited, not scared. I was worried about dropping the letter, though, and I kept touching it to make sure it hadn't fallen out of my shirt. After a while, I came to the place where the road from the center runs into Fairfield Road. I stopped for a moment to rest, to see if I couldn't find a better way to stow the letter so it would be safe. I was trying to find a way to hitch it under my belt when I heard someone shout. I looked up. Betsy Reed was coming down the road from the center. "Hello, Tim," she said. "Hello." She came up to me. "What are you doing there? What's that?" Hastily, I shoved the letter back into my shirt. "Nothing," I said. "Well, it isn't nothing," she said. "It's a letter." She smiled. "You've got a girlfriend." "No," I said. "I've got to go. I'm kind of in a hurry." "I'll walk with you," she said. "Where are you going?" It made me nervous having her walk along with me. She wasn't suspicious of anything, and I didn't think she'd go down to the tavern and tell Father she'd seen me. But what if she happened to bump into him? She might say something then. "I'm going fishing." "Fishing? On the Fairfield Road?" "There are shad in the Mill Stream." "Well, you're going in the wrong direction then," she said. "Oh, yeah, well, I know that. I was up there already, but there wasn't any shad, so I'm going someplace else." I was blushing from telling so many lies. Lying is a sin. "Don't you want to know where I'm going?" she said. "Sure," I said. "I'm going down to Horseneck. Guess what I'm doing there?" It was better to have her talk than me because it saved me from lying. "I don't know. Shopping for cloth?" "Guess again." Horseneck was down on Long Island Sound too, but much farther south than Fairfield. I couldn't figure out what she would be doing there. "Visiting your cousins?" "I don't have any cousins down there." "What then?" "Seeing Sam," she said. I stopped dead in the road. "Sam? Is he in Horseneck?" "I shouldn't tell you that. You're a Tory. Anyway, he's not there anymore. They've gone someplace else." We weren't walking along anymore, but facing each other. I was all excited. "How do you know Sam's there?" "Mr. Huron told me." "Mr. Huron? How does he know? He's a Tory." She frowned. "Well, I know that. But he said that Sam was there with a commissionary officer scouting for beef." This didn't make any sense. Mr. Huron was supposed to be a Tory. He wasn't supposed to know where the American commissionary officers were. Suddenly I realized I was wasting time. "Where is he now?" "I will not tell you. You're a Tory." "That's not fair, Betsy. He's my brother." "God, Tim, you tried to shoot him." I blushed. "Is Sam all right?" "Yes, he was in a battle. Well, I guess I better not tell you about it." "You can tell me about it if it already happened, can't you?" "I better not," she said. "Listen," I said, "I better get going." We started walking. "Where are you off to anyway in such a rush?" "If you won't tell me anything, I won't tell you either." I thought that was a pretty smart answer. It was like one of Sam's telling points. "All right then, sulk," she said. "Besides, I know you're carrying a love letter for somebody." "You've just got love on your mind because of Sam," I said. Something was still puzzling me. "Betsy, how come Mr. Huron didn't tell me about Sam this morning?" "Because you're a Tory." "But so is he." She stopped. "Hey, what were you doing seeing Mr. Huron this morning?" I realized I'd made a bad mistake. "Oh, well, I just happened to go by his house this morning and he was there." There? Where? He was standing in the yard. Doing what? She asked. How would I know what he was doing? He wouldn't have been standing. The letter. Tim, you're lying. The letter. He gave you the letter to carry. Tim, where are you going with that letter? She was pretty excited and kind of bouncing around in front of me. I have to go, Betsy. She jumped in my way. Oh, no, you don't. Not until you tell me about that letter. She was bigger than me, but not by much, and I figured since I was a boy I could break away from her and run if she tried to stop me. It's a private letter. I can't tell you about it. Oh, no, Tim, she shouted. Give me that letter. No, I said. I tried to duck past her, but she jumped in front of me again. Tim, she screamed. Do you know what's in that letter? It's a spy report on Sam. That shocked me. It can't be. Why would Mr. Huron make a spy report on Sam? Not just Sam. Can't you see? Why would Mr. Huron make a spy report on just Sam? It's about Sam and the commissary officer buying beef, and he's sending news to the lobster backs so they'll know where to find them and kill them and steal the cows. Give me that letter. She snatched at my shirt, but I ducked back. Don't, Betsy, it's Mr. Huron's. Tim, you're going to get Sam killed. They'll set up an ambush for them and kill them all. No, no, I said. It's true, Tim. Figure it out. You can't deliver that letter. I have to, I said. She stood in front of me, kind of begging. Tim, let's open and see. If there's nothing important in it, then you can deliver it. I can't break the seal, Betsy. It's Mr. Huron's letter. I could be put in jail for that. Tim, it's your brother they're going to kill. Just throw the letter away and say you lost it. I didn't know what to do. I felt awful, sick and scared. I didn't say anything. Tim, give me that letter. Betsy! Then she jumped me. She caught me completely by surprise. She just leaped onto me and I fell down backwards and she was lying on top of me trying to wrestle her hands down inside my shirt. God damn you, Betsy, I shouted. I grabbed her by her hair and tried to pull her head back, but she jerked it away from me. I began kicking around with my feet trying to catch her someplace where it would hurt, but she kept wriggling from side to side on top of me and I couldn't get in a good kick. I hit her on the back, but in that position I couldn't get much force. Get off of me, Betsy! Not until I get that letter, she said. She jerked at my shirt, trying to pull it up. I grabbed at her hands and twisted my body underneath her to turn over so I would be on top. But she pushed her whole weight on me, grunting. I slammed her as hard as I could on the side of the head. You little bastard, she shouted. She let go of my shirt with one hand and slapped me as hard as she could across my face. My nose went numb and my eyes stung and tears began to come. Damn you, I shouted. I let go of her hand where she was clutching my shirt and grabbed her by the shoulders, trying to push her off of me. She jerked my shirt up, grabbed the letter, and jumped to her feet. Without rising, I kicked out with both my feet at her ankles. I got in a good one, and she stumbled, but she didn't fall. By the time I got up, she was running down Fairfield Road as hard as she could, opening the letter as she went. I started to run after her, and then she flung the letter over her shoulder on the road and disappeared out of sight around the next bend. I ran up to the letter and picked it up. It was all rumpled and dirty, and all it said was, if this message is delivered, we will know that our messenger is reliable. All right, that was chapters 5 and 6. Gertie's finally chillaxed. Well, there she is. Hey, you say goodbye? You guys have a good night, and happy reading. We will do 7, which puts us caught up to where we were before we left. Maybe I'll post it tomorrow. Okay, I miss you guys. See you later. Bye.